you have got fantastic stuff going on in FE colleges as well, and young people in FE colleges are coming out of it trained up, skilled up, and feeling that hope again in themselves. That is amazing when you see a child turn around and believe in themselves again and realize they can give a lot, and they can do this. It's not about I'm no good at math. I can actually do this. It's fantastic.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hello, friends. Welcome once again to the Rethinking Education podcast, Education's critical friend. In the week that the general election was called, I bring you a timely conversation about some of the questions an incoming government might need to grapple with. Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, recently posted on X that an incoming Labour government would look at curriculum reform. This prompted something of a mixed response, it's fair to say, with many people, those of a more traditionalist persuasion, I noticed, expressing dismay at the prospect of another curriculum overhaul. And it's an understandable response, I think. Curriculum reform is a relatively inexpensive way for a government to look like it's doing something, and many people feel that curriculum is really not a priority at the moment. And it's exhausting trying to get your head around a new curriculum, and that probably is going to impact workload, which may exacerbate existing, potentially even more pressing concerns like teacher retention. And also, thanks to the reforms of the last 10 or 12 years or so, academies no longer need to follow the national curriculum. And so unless they change that policy, it seems a bit weird to set about creating a new national curriculum that only around half of schools would need to follow. These reservations aside, I do think that there's a strong case for looking at the curriculum again. Recently, I've been working with a new group called the Education Policy Alliance, a kind of grassroots think tank that's dedicated to crowdsourcing education policy ideas. And we've recently been looking at mental health and well-being, and we administered a survey that was completed by around 160 people or so, mainly parents and carers. And a surprising finding to emerge from that survey is that lots of people said that one way to improve mental health and well-being is to look at the curriculum. We didn't ask about curriculum, but curriculum reform came through loud and clear in the reasons that people think that school is negatively impacting on people's mental health and well-being, which is interesting to say the least. My guest in this episode, Meena Wood, is no stranger to curriculum reform, and indeed she wrote an excellent book a few years ago outlining her vision for a new secondary curriculum, more on which shortly, but firstly I should probably introduce her properly. Meena Kumari Wood is a former HMI and a leader of FE colleges who now works across the British and international education sectors. She's held senior leadership positions in English schools and further education colleges, including as a principal of a secondary academy and principal of an adult education college. As a former advisor to the Department for Education and currently as an international education consultant, Meena emphasizes the importance of placing learners' aspirations and needs at the heart of the curriculum, an interest-based, learner-centered curriculum that recognizes that we need to follow the interests of the kids, which might seem eminently sensible to some people, but it's quite a radical idea that lots of people are also quite opposed to. Meena conducts in-school reviews looking at curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, leadership, and training for inspection in the UK. She also hosts international webinars and has worked closely with schools in India for several years on helping them to develop effective continuous assessment systems in line with the National Indian Curriculum Framework. Meena has authored 2 books, Assessment of Prior Learning and Bilingual Learners in 1995 and Secondary Curriculum Transformed, Enabling All to Succeed in 2020. This latter book, Secondary Curriculum Transformed, argues for an equitable and diverse knowledge and skills-based English curriculum, preparing young people for the changing global landscape of society and employment. And she was recently appointed to the advisory board of the Chartered College of Teaching. She knows what she's talking about, essentially, and she's very, very experienced and knowledgeable in a whole range of domains. And this was a fascinating conversation in which we discussed the incredible journey that Meena and her family made to this country in the 1960s. Curriculum reform, of course, the way in which English education is very insular and that it would benefit from a little learning from other countries, and on the importance of flying the flag for FE, further education, which is something that we don't hear enough, I don't think. It's a slightly shorter episode than normal, but we pack a lot into just over an hour. If you enjoy these conversations as much as I do, and you would like to contribute to the costs of this show, you may, if you wish, become a patron of the show. In return, depending on the level at which you choose to patronize the podcast, you can receive a PDF of Fear is the Mind Killer, a book about self-regulated learning that I wrote with my friend Kate McAllister, access to a 23-part online course, Self-Regulated Learning Superpowers, and a searchable audio transcript of every episode to date. You can also help, for example, by clicking like, follow, subscribe, whatever your podcast player allows, and by giving us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts. That would be really helpful. There's a link in the show notes if you feel so moved. All of which said, I will now hand over to my recent fascinating conversation with Meena Wood. Hope you enjoy the show. Meena Wood, we speak at last.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast. It is wonderful to finally speak with you. I don't even know how long we've been sort of planning this conversation for, but it's a really long time. And now we're here. So let's crack on with it. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to take us all the way back to your childhood and to talk about your own experience of education and stuff. But just to begin with, there's a little opening question for any viewers or listeners who aren't familiar with you or your work. Could you please just give a brief introduction as to who you are and what you do currently?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, James. I'm delighted to be here, as you say, finally. Looking forward to the podcast this afternoon and sharing some information. Well, information is sharing really what I'm passionate about and always have been. Yeah, I'm somebody who entered education as a classroom teacher of French many years ago, and then actually left schools after 8 years and moved into further education. And that was quite a telling moment for me, because what I could see when I moved into further education were, if you like, the rejects from school. So all those children who failed at 16, and they did fail. They failed their GCSE English Maths predominantly, but they literally failed, and they had that ingrained sense of failure from school. So they came for a second chance. It was almost like that second chance in further education where they could be allowed to blossom, to flourish, to actually achieve their aspirations. And that, to me, summed up our education at a very early stage in my career, summed up our education system in the UK, and particularly in England, I think, where we are systematically allowing children to fail, young people to fail at 16, and then picking them up almost as a second chance. But it's an education system that is, if you like, hierarchical and two-tier, which has those that are successful and will make their way to university seamlessly, it seems, and those that will not. So either they're excluded from school or they fail. So that was my experience. And I was in FE actually for a good 15 years, much longer than I was actually in schools. And became a principal, finally went through senior leadership to become a principal of an adult college. So I then also worked with adults, not just young people. And then finally, I decided, for better or for worse, to move into Ofsted as an HMI. And when I moved into Ofsted in 2002, it was interesting because I joined what was then the post-16 division, and that was all around further education. It was around training offenders institutes, so for young youth offenders, It was around apprenticeships and training providers, and anything to do with post-16 education, including adults, and working with universities on return to learn programs, or working, I should say, inspecting. Incredibly varied, far more varied as a remit than is currently the case. Then I moved back into schools inspections in 2006, and left in 2013, having felt it was a privilege to have been an HMI at that point, but then I felt it was getting tarnished as a role and as a remit, because I felt Ofsted had lost its way. Moved into the school sector, ended up as principal of a secondary academy within a trust. And then in 2019, I left and did a fair bit of consultancy work. But more importantly for me, I was able to pursue my passion of writing a book on secondary curriculum transformed, because I felt that was the nub of the matter. There's a whole issue around Ofsted accountability and so on, and I feel that is being done to death at the moment. But the most important thing is, if you can address the education of children and young people through a curriculum that meets needs for all children and young people, then I think you've got a society that is equitable and fair. And that's what I've been doing since then, is doing a lot of training around curriculum and assessment, which, as I said, is really my biggest commitment and passion. So that's me in a nutshell, hopefully.
Right, thank you. Big nutshell, if I may be so bold.
Lots of nuts in it, James. Lots of nuts. Principally one big nut over here.
I like it. We're straight in at the deep end there. There's loads of issues that have come out in what you just said.
Yeah.
And then most recently, you joined the board of the Chartered College of Teaching, didn't you? And you're looking at curriculum there as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm on the advisory board, so I'm one of the on the advisory board of Chartered College of Teaching. I'm really delighted about that, because I honestly have a great respect, deep respect for Alison Peacock, who has founded it. And I remember at the inception when she did found the Chartered College. Like myself, she's really impassioned by creating a teaching profession that is actually what it says on the tin, a profession that is professional and has chartered status. And I fully endorse that, because I think there needs to be a platform for teachers, which currently there isn't. So I think the role of the chartered college is a really important one. So I'm absolutely privileged to have been selected to be an advisor on their advisory board. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really fascinating. FE has been a bit of a blind spot in I've never worked in an FE college, so I don't have direct experience of it, although I of course understand what they are and what they do. But it's really interesting to hear you describing it in that way, that we have a system that fails kids every year, guaranteed. Like there are kids that are born today. I always think about this: why died little babies in the maternity ward? And you just think, 1/3 of you, if we don't change this system, 1/3 of you is going to fail as a function of the system that we've set up.
But James, if I can say, it's not even that 1/3 who fail. We are failing children before they get to the 1/3, because we're excluding them. So you're forgetting the children who end up in APs, an alternative provision. Only 1% of those will actually end up with a GCSE in English and maths.
Right.
So there are those children which people conveniently, the invisible, I was referred to them as the invisible children who do not get a crack at the whip. They literally don't, because they're excluded from school. Right? They go down the spiral of FTEs, fixed term exclusions, and then they finally, a number of them will become permanent exclusions, and they will not be counted in that 1/3. I'll be honest with you, for me now, I think the root cause of problems in this education system is, and it comes back to that accountability framework. I'm not going to use the O word because it's meaningless, but it's about having an accountability framework that looks at destinations that looks at on-entry and destinations of young people and children, because that's what you do in FE. In FE, I was paid to keep my students, because they could walk. It wasn't mandatory, it's not statutory. They could walk. So if we lost students, bums on seats as we call them, we lost our income. Now, schools really don't have that kind of what should we say, that stick to beat them with. All they get is Ofsted inspections, and Ofsted doesn't even look at that anyway. They don't look at the destinations of young people and children. Therefore, schools can get away with impunity as to what they're doing. They can hide behind all of this. I was going to use a word which you probably shouldn't, because it was not a polite word. But anyway, having said that, what you need to be doing is looking longitudinally at children in this country, and not at the short term, up to 16.
Yeah.
And it needs to look at what's happening at the entry point into secondary as well, because there's a whole load of issues, James, around fair access arrangements now. There was a recent article, I think, in yesterday's paper in the media about access arrangements for children in comprehensive schools, non-selective schools, and actually there are selective arrangements in place. I know that. I live in a local authority which has a selective system. So children have to pass a test at 11 to get into a school, because 40% of the entrants in that school will be taken from that group of children who've got a particular outcome in those tests. 40%. And that's for all the schools where I live locally, and one of which I worked in actually when a very big comprehensive when the beginning of my teaching career. Now that can't be fair, and I've talked to parents locally who've said, this is my local school, I'm 10 minutes away from it, but I can't get my child in that school because I've been excluded. My child's a bit like a grammar school, in fact. So there is a really deep-rooted inequality within the education system, which I think has to be addressed at some point, that you can't keep doing what we're doing now and failing generation after generation, as you said, of young people, in the way we're doing it.
Yeah, it's really hard to unpick, isn't it? Because, it's such a complicated thing, and nobody set out to design a system that would replicate social and economic inequality. Like, that didn't happen. I think that often the road to hell is... What's that?
It may have done, James. You never know.
Well, I've read a lot. I've read a lot of stuff over the years, and I don't think that that's what happened. To be fair, in the old days, right? I think you could make a case. In the old days, people used to say things like, we don't want to educate working class kids. People just used to say it outright. We'll give them ideas above their station. People used to talk about their station in life all the time. Right, so you could argue, maybe I'm a little bit rose-tinted. Maybe there was a bit of that way back in the day. But I don't think that people currently running schools are interested in that. And certainly even the rhetoric on the right of politics, you don't hear people talking about suppressing the working classes anymore, thank goodness. It's still happening, but at least the rhetoric has changed. And I don't think that people like Nick Gibb, who is often a sort of a bit of a bogeyman for certain people in education, I think that he genuinely thinks that he's doing what is best by kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. I don't think that I agree with everything that he says, but I think that he's well-intentioned. But here we are. We have this system that is, without a shadow of doubt, replicating social and economic inequality.
It is definitely.
And how do we put the brakes on that and turn it around? Is essentially what this whole podcast is about, really.
Yeah, and the disadvantage factor is huge in this country, and it is geographically huge as well, and it is racially huge, and that's the problem we have. It's biased with gender, race, and geography, So as you were saying earlier on, if you did a Venn diagram of who these people are, who are getting, being failed or being excluded, it's the same people, same race, gender, and people who live in, in certain parts of the country. So you have a system that however well the intent is for anybody in government, is actually systematically creating social inequalities. And you've only got to look at the research by the Education Policy Institute And they've done a lot of research on this, and it's bearing out, you know, that we are actually building in inequality and inequity into this system, which actually is having a huge impact on society and the economy. So you're developing an unproductive society, and you know, because if what you're doing is creating people who are unskilled because they haven't got the right qualifications or the right education to enable them to function in particular jobs, then you've got a shortage of skills in your labour market, and productivity is going to be very low. And we do have one of the lowest productivity rates in this country, in Europe, in fact. You know, I think it's actually, unfortunately, bar Russia. I'm not sure, but Russia is probably very productive elsewhere. Let's not go there. With their military.
They're productive in other ways.
In other ways, they're very productive, and they don't.
Productive troll farms.
Exactly. So yeah, so I think, you know, the issue is not just we need an education, because I know a lot of people are questioning at the moment, James, what is the purpose of school? And then I know on Twitter, I've been on Twitter and I've said, you know, well, it is surely about creating young people who can, you know, function in society, can follow their aspirations, can contribute to society meaningfully, etc. And I've had people come back and say, no, that is not the function of education. The function of education is for people to go to school and become educated in particular ways. Yes, of course, that is the function of education, but it is also not denying them those possibilities to move into areas they want to. And I think, James, if we take the area of creative arts, you know, let's take music, let's take the arts, let's take media, let's take, you know, design and technology, let's take STEM subjects, you know, engineering, technology, all of those subjects. Where are they on the curriculum? Year by year, they are dropping off the curriculum. So, you know, for if you want, I mean, there are going to be children in school now who never have had a piano lesson, or, you know, been able to sort of enjoy making music, or even going into and doing painting and creative work. They won't be able to, they won't have those opportunities. They won't even have technology, you know, design and technology opportunities.
Yeah.
And they're not even, the computing qualifications they follow are not even fit for purpose now, as we speak, in this digital age. So there are a number of things going acutely wrong with the whole education system, and it's out of kilter with some of the others and the rest of the world, you know, which are far better and much more sussed out in terms of, you know, what is needed for society and what is needed for children and young people. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not going to talk about particular politicians, but you know, when we did have an education system prior to 2012, which allowed for vocational qualifications and technical qualifications to be in place, you did have children who were able to follow hairdressing or plumbing or whatever courses, because they were doing them in school and then outside school in FE colleges, because you had that kind of joined up 14 to 19 diploma, which was being developed at that point. But then that was obviously taken away by the infamous Mr. Gove and the even more infamous Mr. Gibb. So there you go.
Indeed. So we
history of education.
So we dived into the deep end, and then we got even deeper. We're now somewhere out deep into the ocean, and so I'm going to head for shore for now. We're going to get back into all of those issues, and I know you especially want to talk about curriculum and the issues that you raise in your book and so on. I'd like to start though by taking you back, if I may, to your own childhood. We're going to swim for Zanzibar, are we not? To your own childhood in Zanzibar and your own experience of school. And I know that you moved countries when you were young, and so you've probably got quite a lot to talk about there. But what was your experience of school? Take me back to the beginning for you. What kind of a student was the young Meena Wood?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, so in Zanzibar, as you say, I was brought up at a time when colonial rule was at its height in Africa and so on, where I was. And so part of the empire, really. And then everything came crashing down in the 60s when, you know, there was reclaiming back by the Africans of their country, which is fair enough. And then we had to leave. My family had to leave. So as refugees, asylum seekers, call it what you will, but obviously the British government honoured us coming over here. So as I always say, we are over here because they were over there. So that's it. You know, that sums up the British Empire, doesn't it, really?
How old were you when that move happened, Meena?
Right, so there's the thing. We started the move, and it wasn't intended when I was probably 8 years old, because we came here on holiday at Christmas time, and because my sister was studying here. So we came here on holiday and we saw the revolution, and it was called a revolution, take place on television. And that that was the first time I'd ever seen television, because we didn't have television in Zanzibar. So
it's a dramatic introduction to television.
Very dramatic. So we saw people, because it's a small island, you knew people. We saw people that we knew on the screen, you know, black and white pictures. So it was quite dramatic. And we then went back. This bit's really dramatic, because my father worked for the police, and his deputy had been lashed he'd been lashed while, and they'd said that if my father returned, he would have been executed, actually.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. And they put him under house arrest. They put my father under house arrest, because by the time we'd gone back, things had settled down a bit. My mother, who ironically was an inspector of schools, the education authority. I know.
Okay.
Family joke, I think. Clearly your dog thinks it's very funny.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Great. They insisted that she worked with the new regime to rebuild the education system. Obviously my parents didn't want to. They wanted to leave, but they couldn't because of that. So it was a dangerous time. They had, all I remember as a child was hiding a lot in the house, because they would have small children, you know, 10, 12-year-olds with guns parading up and down outside the road, in the road, knocking on people's doors and saying, you know, we want this, we want this. My parents had to say to me, you know, you go and hide inside, because what they were doing at the time was a lot of the ministers, the new ministers, were actually abducting children, young girls, and deciding whatever they wanted to do with them. So my parents were desperate to leave, but they couldn't leave. So what they did, they said they were going for a trip to Nairobi, Kenya, for 3 days. And they had to make it completely as if it was a 3-day. They had to go to the hospital or something. They made up some excuse. And so we literally left with a suitcase. They had to leave everything behind, because they couldn't let we had servants, and you know, anybody, they couldn't let anyone know that we were leaving on a permanent basis. When we got to Nairobi, we had to get on the aircraft they had to get tickets to get on the aircraft. And unfortunately, my uncle lived there. So we got tickets, got on the aircraft to come to the UK. We were very, very lucky, James, because at the airport, it was just chaotic. And there were lots of officials with machine guns. I mean, they generally were walking around, shoving people into different queues, smashing anything you had. One of them took I had a teddy bear or something, I remember, as a child, and he slashed it open to see whether there were jewels in there, because there were a lot of people hiding stuff to take with them. Right. So it was an absolute chaos. I remember that as a child. It was really scary, very, very scary experience. And I mean, I wasn't that young. I was 8, so I remember it well. Anyway, we got in the right place, and we managed to get the plane and arrive in London in the biggest smog. I think it was 63, where you had it's massive smog. And to be honest, I'd never seen anything like it. And I genuinely thought as a child the clouds had come down with us. I had no idea what this substance was. I'd never seen anything like it in my life.
Zanzibar looks kind of amazing looking at the photos of it. It's all tropical and clear waters and palm trees and coastlines. So
you come from that on a plane through the sky, and you're kind of enveloped in this smog, wearing a thin cotton dress. And that was my first introduction to the UK. Coming down I always remember walking down the steps and thinking, this must be hell.
And you knew by then that this was a permanent
going to be
move.
permanent, yeah. So then what happened, coming back to schooling, I went to various schools because we were moving around trying to find the right place to live in South London. So I actually, between the ages of 8 and 11, I probably was in 3 primary schools. And so my education suffered enormously, particularly maths. My English was fine, but my maths went, just kind of, I was just awful at it, as a lot of children say today. I'm really not good at maths. I mean, genuinely, mine just went off the wall. So when we finally decided where we were going to stay in South London, the school I was in, I then underwent a lot of racism to the extent that I truanted from school every day. It was absolutely horrendous. And when my mother went to the local education authority and said, this is what's going on, they just turned a blind eye. So it was just like, there was no, nothing. And so that was my first experience of schooling in this country. And then when I went to secondary, and then I failed the 11th class, because that's what you had to fail that, went to secondary modern, where the aspirations were absolutely wonderful. You either became a nurse or a secretary. That was it. Those were the pathways that were offered to me. And my mother said, well, she's been told she's capable of doing more and can go on, no, she can only do, I think in those days it was like 5 O levels or 4 O levels. 4 O levels, that was it. Could do 4. Even though you were capable of doing more, you could. Yeah, glass ceiling. And then at 16, you would have to leave to go to the grammar school to do your A levels and so on. Long story short, I managed to get to 16 with my O levels. I decided, I was quite rebellious by then, I think, and I decided I didn't want to go to grammar school. I was going to go to an FE college, which had just started up. So I went to an FE college locally and just opened up and did my A levels and went to university. And the irony of all of that was that the school then wrote to my mother and said, when I was 18, went to university, oh, she's the first girl to go to university from our school. Can she come and talk to our, because it was girls only school, as an alumni? And I thought, no, I won't show you the gesture I made. And I saw that, my mother said to me, I think you should go. No way. And now in retrospect, I think I should have gone and talked through what happened to me. But at that point, I was just not going to do it. I was so angry with them for having created all these obstacles,
Yeah, they wanted to parade you as a success story.
Yeah. And not down to them at all, because it was just so awful. They would not allow me to do, science I couldn't do. They wouldn't allow me to do science O level. It was ridiculous,
Yeah,
I was perfectly capable of it. And they were saying, yeah, she can do it, but that's not our policy. So I think from that, I learned, so my FE introduction came at an early, with me having gone through FE. And I think for me, what I learned was education can make or break individual people. And unless you're really resilient and really want to push yourself, and you're left on your own, basically, no one's going to bat for you. And nowadays, I think children do get more than I did in those days. But I still think, this pattern of failing children, as we were talking of earlier on, has persisted and is pretty endemic in society now. So it's transformed into a different way or transmuted into a different format. But that basic principle of failing children has never left English society, or British society, as far as I'm aware. And I'm talking from the 60s now, 1960s to nowadays. So that has influenced me so much so that when I wrote the book, I really felt that this book is about children who are being failed by a system. And that's why I called it Secondary Curriculum Transformed, because I wanted to put something together that could offer an alternative to what we currently have. Ironically, the Select Committee report now that's just recently come out from Joe Johnson, as it was edited it up, actually is brilliant, I think, because it's saying a lot of what I've said in the book about how it's not fit for purpose. But the sadness is, because it's a Select Committee report, it doesn't have many teeth, and whether anybody will follow it, including any subsequent government, wait to see, don't you, really? So Yeah, I mean, I
Who
think
was it who said something like there's just like the art of getting stuff into practice is just that there have to be the right ideas that are floating around at the right time. And so those ideas are now floating around. And so who knows, an incoming
yeah,
government might grab them off the
hopefully.
shelf.
Yeah, hopefully things
You'd
will
hope so.
change. I mean, you have to be hopeful and you have to be optimistic, don't you? But there does need to be an endemic change, doesn't there, really? It can't just be tinkering around, can it?
No, and it's still unclear. I think it's hard to know, isn't it? Because we're still ahead of this upcoming election, and Labour seem to be keeping their cards close to their chest. They're certainly not talking about anything radical at
No.
all. You know, like they seem to be playing a very safe set of cards. I don't know whether that's because they just that is what they genuinely think, or are they just keeping their powder dry? Who knows? But
I
I
think
guess
the
time
main
will tell.
issue, James, will be investment. And the problem is, if you want to go down the road of a radical change with education, you're going to have to invest in teachers training teachers up. You know, you're going to have to invest in creating systems in schools, you know, starting with senior leaders who know what they're doing and creating curriculum that actually fit for purpose. You can't create a pathways curriculum now very easily unless you actually decide, well, you know, we are going to try and invest in children who come into secondary school without the required reading skills. I mean, that's what I did in my school. We had a pathways curriculum for those children who arrived. We had about 1/3 of our children arrived in year 7 with reading age that varied between 5 and maybe 8 years old. So these kids were 11, yeah, and they were coming. So we had a pathways curriculum, and I deployed. I actually recruited maths, science, English, and humanities teachers, and I had a room specifically set up where these children were taught in small groups. And they had a sort of shadow curriculum that went on, and then they could join as and when they were ready with their reading skills and so on. They could access mainstream classes. They went in, but we always made sure that if they needed additional support, they went back to the subject teachers that we'd got in this particular area. Because the point is, if all you think about is intervention and all you think about is teaching assistants providing that sticking plaster, I'm not being derogatory about teaching assistants, but to be honest, that model doesn't always work because they're not given the time to plan lessons with the class teacher. So if that is the only way that you're going to work with young children when they come into secondary school, you aren't ever going to catch up. They're never going to catch up. So by the time they're into Key Stage 3, they're already lagging behind. And I honestly believe, James, that all the issues we're getting with behaviour now in schools is down to that. The children can't. I mean, I know it was happening in my school. We had huge problems with behaviours with children because they just couldn't settle in class. They couldn't access what was going on in those lessons. So we had to take them out and put them in smaller groups. And they actually worked well. They worked well. It was fine, you know, but we invested in subject teachers. And that's a heavy investment for a school to make. I use my pupil premium money to do that, and you know, I had to top it up with other monies, you know. But I can't see whether schools would do that or not. No, but that is actually a really good model. So,
yeah, interesting.
You know,
Yes, and so in a moment, I'd like to get into the curriculum stuff, but just to finish off the you bit, if you like, I'm really interested in this idea of significant learning. The learning that shapes us, the learning that matters, if you like. And you've already talked about a lot of those sorts of the early episodes, especially in the transition to this country. But as you look back over your life, are there any other key sort of moments that stand out? Go on.
It's the way you said as you look back over your life, I'm thinking, oh my God, that makes me feel old. No, I am joking. Yes. Are there any key moments? Yes.
Yeah, the key moments that stand out that have really shaped your thinking. It's, for example, I'm interested to the fact that you went back to FE is interesting. Was that a conscious decision that you sort of because you had been in FE yourself that you wanted to sort of to work back in that environment?
There were a couple of factors, one of which was the fact that I was teaching French. And to be honest, it was pretty soulless. I mean, I I loved teaching the year 7s and 8s. But when they got to year 9, for some reason, they became completely disillusioned. Because to be fair, unless you start children young with languages, they're not going to really be successful, unless they're really keen to learn the language. Bilingualism has to start much earlier in primary schools and be done properly, not just, coming into the classroom, bonjour la classe, je m'appelle, and all of that. It has to be something a bit more systematic and working in tandem with secondary schools, in terms of embedding language. So by the time, I love my A-level kids, absolutely love them to bits, but frankly, I got disillusioned with kids who always kept, a little tranche of children who always were saying, why do we need to learn French? They all speak English over there, and they don't. But anyway, that's beside the point. And I just felt like, okay, I am now going to retrain. And I decided to retrain to teach English as a foreign language and as a second language. So I did my diplomas in that and thought, right, I'm going to start teaching adults now. And I found that incredibly rewarding, because we had, at that time, we had the influx of, influx, that's the wrong word to use, but we had Vietnamese refugees, they call them the boat people in that time, it's a pejorative term, but Vietnamese who came here. This would have been again in South London. So working with them, and just generally teaching English to those people who really genuinely needed it because they're living in this society, appealed to me. So I made the shift on that account. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel FE is not, is something weird and I need to stay in schools. For me, because I guess I'd been in an FE college, I felt quite comfortable working in FE, and I just felt really, it is very rewarding. And because you are delivering vocational subjects. So when one of the penultimate post I had, for example, because I worked in 4 London colleges, and the penultimate was in Southwark College, where I was the assistant principal of a large faculty which covered health and social care, catering, hospitality. It covered sort of a variety of subjects, which, vocational subjects, which, childcare, you name it. It was all in there. It was the biggest one in the college, and it's straddled 4 campuses across London. Now, that's pretty amazing when you think of all the people that you are touching, whose lives you're touching. Plus, as I said, we had these access courses to HE. So it was a pretty ambitious program, and I just think you can do so much in FE, and I just feel it's the poor relation in this country. It should be actually, made much more. There should be far more collaboration between schools and FE, which, as I said earlier on, we had the 14 to 19 diploma, and that worked really well. And when I was in HMI, we actually inspected it when it first came out, and we wrote a report that said it's got huge potential. And I then obviously, as I say, it was done away with. But if you had something like that in place, I think it would really create children and young people who could flourish, because then you would have genuine pathways, wouldn't you? Yeah. So for me, that was a significant turning point. And for me, I always felt really pleased that I had worked across ways, not just stuck in the sector. When I look at some of my former HMI colleagues and listen to their experiences, they talk in a very limited way about schools. They haven't had a broader experience, and I think when you worked in different spheres of education, as say, for example, even inspecting prisons, inspecting prison education and youth offenders institutes, inspecting, for example, area-wide inspections we did, where you would go in and you would literally look at the schools and the FE colleges within that area. So it was literally, I went in and did Stockport and the Isle of Wight, for example. It was fascinating what you came out with, So you're not just homing in on one particular school every week, which is what then happened when I went back into schools. You're homing in on a whole area, local community, and how they're being impacted by their local provision. But, that's that's obviously coming back to the accountability framework, which is something else in the whole big subject. So, so that's the first thing. And then I think you're saying other significant moments. I suppose it would be when I was an HMI, and I think one of the things I really, really enjoyed doing was working with schools when you could bring them out of special measures. You know, that was absolutely fantastic in those days. I think now, I can't talk about now, but when I was there, it was very developmental, and it was very fulfilling, you know, to be able to work with schools and then to help them, you know, show them the good practice that was happening in other schools so they could actually take that on board. And then the other area I really enjoyed doing was around writing thematic surveys. So we would pick, for example, disadvantaged pupils and look at what worked for those and get case studies together. And to be honest, James, a lot of that influenced my writing of the book. So in the book, I've got lots of case studies, you know, of schools that I visited and so on. And I think it's really important, and we don't do enough of it in this country, is share good practice across the piece. There was a point at which Ofsted's role was that, sharing that good practice, but that's gone now. And what Ofsted tends to do is tell you what they think is good practice that's come out of their unit, which is not how it should be. We should be going to ground level, looking at what practitioners are doing, and there's fantastic practice out there. You know, I always think, you know, I'm always learning when I'm going into schools as to what different ways you can be doing things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's for me are some of the key moments. And then obviously when I wrote the book and the work I've been doing since then on training schools in Northern Ireland in particular, but also working with schools in Wales and obviously in England, that's amazingly rewarding, because that in itself, when you do a training workshop, you've got a group of people who can network and talk, and that's the best bit. They can talk to each other and learn from each other, because I feel like I'm a catalyst. I just go in there and set off, you know, talking about them, and a bit like you're doing a podcast, you know, that's what I'm doing. But then they work together and start collaborating and talking about the experiences. Networking is really key in education. I don't think we do enough of it. And that is something that should happen much more of, in my view.
I agree. That's what's so lovely about the conferences, right? That we're bringing all of these people together, and it's not really got a purpose. It's just, you know, it's just bring people together and allow connections to be made. And lots of people are so grateful for that opportunity to just say, oh, wow, just to be able to come and just to be inspired, to just listen to people, especially when cross-pollination happens. So you're not just talking to other people in FE or other people who are interested in English as an additional language, say, but in all kinds of things, right? And you see all these sparks flying, and so it's a wonderful thing. So let's talk about the book. I read it when you first sent it me, like 2 years ago, when we first started talking about these things. But no, it's so long ago. So can you refresh my memory, but also for the benefit of listeners? So this is a book that you wrote with Nick Haddon, Secondary Curriculum Transformed, Enabling All to Achieve. Could you sort of just pitch the book for us? What were you trying to achieve with this book? What's the vision for this different secondary curriculum that you envisaged?
Yeah, I think what I was trying to do was talk around how the current curriculum is, you know, World Economic Forum has quite clearly said, you know, and I think you said it, children who are going to start primary school today, the jobs that are going to be around when they leave are not even been invented. And I think that would be true. And they made that prediction in 2019. Well, I think if you look at 2024, it's going further down the road of AI, and, you know, digital technology is really there. And then what you have are these portfolio careers now. I mean, you don't have the case of people going into jobs and staying there for life. So my daughter, for example, she's worked in digital healthcare. And so she has got a career that's spanning, you know, it's gone into different areas and come out of them. So it's almost like this sort of zigzag approach to jobs, you know, as opposed to when I was young and we stayed in a job for a long while. And the point being that if you've got that sort of economy going on, as I mentioned earlier on, And then you've got an education system that's actually working towards, you must get your O-level, your GCSEs, your A-levels, and then go to university. It doesn't work. So I talked to a lot of young people who said, they couldn't even get the right CEIAG, the right careers advice and guidance to choose the right subjects that they need. And in fact, they couldn't even choose the right subjects. So there was one person I spoke to, one child, she was year 9, wanted to do robotic processing and couldn't do it because the school wouldn't allow her to take the right combinations of subjects. So that case study's in the book. So what I was trying to do was to say, well, you need to be able to adopt a curriculum. And it's not just about curriculum, it's about CEIAG, it's about how you're involving parents. There's a whole chapter about parental involvement. And
sorry, just that's careers advice and guidance, isn't it? In case anyone's not sure.
CEIAGs, careers, education, advice and guidance, yeah. And it's the old IAG, information advice, but now this is careers, education, advice and guidance. So, and I've done a whole chapter on that because I think it's so important, and it's about the Gatsby benchmarks, which they're there, but nobody looks at them, and certainly the accountability framework, people Ofsted never look at them. They should do, but they don't. So what then happens is that you need to look at all aspects of what's involved in creating a curriculum. It's not just about what subjects am I going to deliver. This is about, the whole package. It's about CAIG, the values the school has as well in terms of its intent, how they're going to implement that, and then how do they quality assure their education in terms of impact. So it's about, I talked about the unit that I had in my school, based it a lot of my experience on the unit that we had for, children who were not able to access the curriculum, the what happened to those children who were excluded, what do we do with those, and brought in lots of case studies from other schools, and also particularly in alternative provision that I was working with at the time. So each chapter is devoted to a different aspect. And one of the things I'm very keen on is bringing in good practice from the international scene. So a lot of the examples I'm giving are not just from this country, but from Singapore, Estonia, Finland, many other countries, which you wouldn't necessarily think they've got the best practice, Hong Kong, but there is good practice. And I think we have to look at how we can cherry pick and take that and develop an education system that really works for children in this country. You can't lift one and put it here because it's not going to work, but you do need to create something that's bespoke for children in this country. And what we have, which is unique here, is we have a group, children that are quite diverse, don't we, in terms of the children that we've got in some parts of the country, but then in other parts of the country, they're pretty homogenous in the way they are. So it is very difficult to create an education system that is going to fit everyone. Right. And so that's why it's even more important. And that's why the book stresses the importance of looking at different aspects of it. One of the key things for me is skills. So we've got a knowledge-rich curriculum at the moment, which to me is complete nonsense, because you can, and I know people will disagree with me, but you can get knowledge at the touch of a button now. And you always have been able to, for the last, since I wrote the book anyway, in 2020. But what you haven't got is children who've got critical thinking skills, who know how to use the knowledge, who know how to select which knowledge is important and which they can discard, who can actually be critical thinkers. So if you look at, for example, Finland, they brought in critical thinking across the curriculum. So every subject had to develop it in some way, art, history, geography, and so on. Why did they do that? Because they felt threatened by the Russians. Literally, they felt the Russians were infiltrating, their press, their media, and they wanted children to be able to read a piece of writing in a paper and media, social media, and to be critical about what they were reading and not to just accept it. Now, I listened to a broadcast the other day where the broadcaster was talking about the importance of AI now in the incoming elections we've got in this country, and so there'll be people around who won't know whether that's true or false, whatever's happening, because AI will kind of put it out there for each party, whichever. And it's that kind of thing that you need to be able to give children.
Yeah.
Be able to make them a bit deeper thinkers, not to accept and swallow whatever they're being told.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel, if you don't transform your curriculum to do that in primary and secondary, then you may as well forget it.
Then it's not going to happen. Not so long ago, I taught, there was a course that OCR did, a level 2 course called TARS, Thinking and Reasoning Skills. And it was brilliant. And it did all of that stuff. It was about critical thinking and making links and understanding about argumentation and about how, propositions lead to intermediary conclusions and then final conclusions, and how you can spot faulty assumptions in people's thinking. It was absolutely brilliant, and it was just discontinued. It was very frustrating. And just to pick up on what you just said there, I mean, that's like the argument that's often used against what you just said is that knowledge is what you think with, right? And so you can't teach skills in the absence of knowledge. And I think that the people who advocate for a knowledge-rich curriculum are half right. I think that they're true. It's true that that's the case, but being knowledgeable, having a knowledge-rich curriculum is not a guarantor that you're going to have critically evaluative population either. You need to teach that stuff as well. So it's both and rather than either or.
You need a knowledge. No, I'm not saying you need either or. You need both. But the issue I have with knowledge is who is selecting the knowledge for you to learn. Now, this comes back to that whole area of let's decolonize the curriculum. Let's do this. Let's do that. And if you only have to look at the history curriculum that children are being taught. They're being taught about the Second World War. They're being taught about Dunkirk. They're being taught about the importance of the British having won the Second World War. A lot of them, that's what they believe. Very fervently, they believe that. And when you talk to them in lessons, they will honestly think that's exactly right. And the baddies were the Germans, and that's it. Frank, they will have no idea that Stalin, for example, sent a lot of Jews as well as Polish, as well as various other, to their camps, after the war. And so, it wasn't just the Germans, etc. But the most important thing they can't do is work out the relevance to today. So they will not be able to work out the relevance between the end of the war and what's happening in Palestine today, Palestine and Israel and so on. Yeah. They'll have no idea. They cannot join that up. They won't even be able to, some of them won't even be able to join up why the Second World War took place after the Versailles Treaty was signed after the end of the First World War. And what was the connection, even though they'll have learned about both. So my point, James, is fine, I have no issue with knowledge, but it's the knowledge that is taught and who is selecting what knowledge is taught. And we know Mr. Gove decided he wanted to create a English curriculum or whatever it might be, and he discarded anything to do with other books. For example, he wanted all the books that children were reading to be by English authors, and so we threw out everything. For example, we threw out Steinbeck's Mice and Men, which is a brilliant book. So children can only read it now in Key Stage 3, but not Key Stage 4. So, and so it goes on. So my question is not, should we have knowledge or skills? No, we should have both. I'm totally agreed with that. I'm up for it. But I would like to see who is selecting that knowledge. And I think that's the question that needs to be asked. And why isn't it more diverse? Why aren't children being taught a more diverse knowledge? Why aren't they being taught to research other knowledge? Because they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to go beyond what they're being taught.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Is that the way in which this idea of knowledge rich, the fact that knowledge rich curriculum is preordained means that it's a very knowledge limited curriculum. Like the idea that you can have a preordained curriculum that's going to cater for the needs and the interests and the passions and what have you, kids who are into robotics like you were talking about, or who, for example, really want to get to the bottom of this complicated, deeply problematic situation of what's happening in the Middle East and how that connects to the Second World War and how far that rabbit hole goes back hundreds of years even. It's It's a
It would
ludicrous
not happen.
situation that we
It would
have
not
like
happen.
so little flexibility, and actually not only is it inflexible, but it like it closes options down. So it's like
Absolutely.
3 options at age 16, one subject, or if you're lucky, you'll get a combined honours degree if you choose to go on to university. And it's all of those options are being narrowed down when we should be blossoming outwards in the shape of a tree. And instead, it's just chopping down like in the shape of a
The
pyramid.
branches are being chopped off, so we end up
Yeah.
getting the stem, you know, like a trunk, and that's
Yeah.
it. I mean,
It's
if you
crazy.
look at the IB, for example, which I have had, you know, the joy of working in Dubai for the last 3 years with schools on curriculum reviews and working through, and also inspecting. I mean, you know, it's a brilliant qualification. It's not perfect because no curriculum is perfect, obviously. But the IB allows children to explore. That allows children to develop into critical thinkers. That is actually the essence of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the knowledge they learn is quite diverse. You know, so if you imagine, the IB is commonly taught to children from different ethnic backgrounds, if you want to use that term. And then when you sit in a lesson, for example, and you see 19 different nationalities, you know, or ethnic background, whatever you want to call them, sitting in a lesson, in a class, you know, learning history. And I remember one lesson where I sat, these were children who were doing the actual diploma bit, you know, this post-16, 17-year-olds. And they were studying, I think there was a poem written by an Arab poet. They were studying this poem, I should say. And the debate that ensued, James, was amazing. It was like having the UN discuss it. So we had a boy who was Jewish. We had 2 that were Arab, you know, either from the Emirates or from other countries in the world where they were, you know, North Africa. We had Europeans, you know, for example, I think that we had the Ukrainians in the class, and I think we may even had a Russian. I can't remember. I mean, I was trying to work out what different nationalities were sitting around the room, you know, 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
Amazingly impassioned discussion around it. Really going into the poem and saying, but hold on, you know, the man is arguing for his motherland, or he's arguing that the Arab poet is saying, you know, I want to I feel you'd underestimate, you know, how much this means to me. This is my land, and you're saying I should change for you. And then the Jewish guy was saying, and this is not recently, this is not at this point, this would have been last year. And the Jewish guy is saying, yes, but then you don't understand after what happened in the Second World, this has become our land. So therefore, this is not yours uniquely. We should share it, you know, and this and that. And it was brilliant, you know, the way this discussion ensued. And the others were joining in and giving their own viewpoints from different, you know, their own perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that would not happen in a classroom in this country, I can tell you that, because the debate would be shut down because, oh dear, it's becoming too political. And that's what I've seen happen. You can't have this debate because it's verging on the political. But everything in life is political, isn't it? History is political. And therefore, if children are learning history, or they're learning poetry, or they're learning literature, they need to have a perspective. And so long as they're able, you were saying earlier on, you know, they're able to argue cogently, and they're able to argue reasonably, and they're able to argue persuasively, that is actually, isn't that the purpose of education? Creating people who are able to do that, not people who are strident and who are arguing with each other and fighting with each other, but people who are able to argue their point in a good way, you know. And that's what was happening. I mean, there wasn't any antagonism, there wasn't any aggression. It was just, I'm going to argue this, but I'm going to persuade you, you know, if I can. And it was great.
I agree with you, and I think that curriculum is the issue. I agree with you there, and that there's been lots and lots of focus on other things recently, on Ofsted, on mental health and well-being, and so on. And understandably, those issues are on attendance. And they're all sort of interconnected, really. But you when we were speaking offline yesterday, you were sort of saying like all of that stuff's important, but until you change the curriculum, you're not going to change anything that's really meaningful for the kids, because the material that they're working with, they're not engaged with. It's not pitched at a level that they're interested in. You were talking earlier about all of those kids who come to secondary school, and the curriculum isn't isn't starting with where they are. It's just like there's this preordained curriculum. We try to do a bit of stuff. Teachers do their best to do, you know, like establish prior knowledge and stuff, but there is still the stuff that's on the test is the stuff that's got to be taught. And I know as a secondary school science teacher for many years, there are so many kids who just were not at all interested in what I had to talk about at all. And that might have been down to my lack of ability to bring this material to life. But some of it is just so abstract and removed from their lives. The specific heat capacity of metals, you know, like I still don't really know what that is. And I taught it endlessly. There's lots and lots of just random bits of information that they sort of have to learn and have to get tested on, that you know in your heart of hearts that they're not going to remember. They're not going to be able to, remember this from one lesson to the next, never mind at the end of year 11 in a terminal exam. And it's that setting up to fail thing again.
Exactly. And they're moving from subject to subject. They close one door, open another. This is why I'm really keen on interdisciplinary approaches.
Yes.
So, you know, that is where it's at. So rather than saying, you know, and you'll see them, you know, they'll sit in a science lesson and they're looking at climate change. And you've been doing that in geography, have I? Yes, you have. You looked at the Bangladesh and looked at the floods, you know, the flooding of the plains. What's that about? Oh, yeah, I guess so. Yeah. And you looked at the rainforests in Brazil. Yeah. So what's that got to do with science? But you're looking at science, climate change. And this is why, again, coming back to the IB, sustainability is a really key part of the curriculum. You know, we're looking at the overall, which is very interesting when it's being taught in a desert, which it is, because there is very little nature, very little flora and fauna.
The carbon footprint on that city.
Believe me, Dubai. Yeah, I mean, you know, I went into a school where I was looking, one of the schools I was working with, and I went into the little ones, you know, the what is it called? The EYF. What's it called? She says. Sounds really weird. Now I was thinking of something else then, but EYFS, you know, the early years bit. And these little toddlers were sort of looking at, all they had was a little sandpit. And I said to one of them, I said, look, you know, is there, what can I, and they were trying to find a leaf. I think they'd got a little leaf, a plastic one. And I said, so what part of the plant is the leaf? And they looked at me and I thought, oh gosh, they haven't even seen a leaf, you know, a tree with leaves on it. And I said to the school, listen, you've got to get some plants into that area, just so in pots, you know, so they can understand. They didn't even know what leaves were, you know, like they were trying to sort of fathom that out, bless their heart. And then year 8, they're not year 8, would be our year 8. These boys, 13-year-olds, they were looking at photosynthesis. You'd appreciate this being a scientist. And they were measuring the distance of light, you know, from the light source to the plant. And I said, okay, that's very interesting. You've got a mathematical graph that's doing that. Fantastic. You know, I can see your mathematical skills are brilliant. Yeah, it was interdisciplinary type. I said, but can you tell me which part of the plant the photosynthesis occurs in? They looked at me and they said, the roots. I said, I looked at it in a double take, the roots. Yeah, the roots. I said, no, try again. The stem. No, try again. And then one of them said, can we Google it? I said, go on and Google it. And they did. And it was like, oh, it's the leaves. Yes, it's the leaves, you know. And it was just so funny because they would try, it was interdisciplinary approach, but what it was the teacher was from the UK. So she was trying to do it kind of almost like the way she would have done it in the UK. She said, I've done it in the way I would have done it in the UK. And I said, yeah, but in the UK, you would have taught them photosynthesis and what it was before you taught them, you know, the distance. She said, yes, but then I thought maybe because I'm doing the IB, I should do it the other way around. Oh, God. But at the end of the day, the fact is when you see it being taught well, you see sustainability developing very well as part of that IB.
Yeah.
And it is being taught in this country. The IB is taught here in schools, you know. And I think
so we have a model that works. It's just not being used in state schools.
But what I'm concerned about, just to finish off on that models, you've got the MBAC, which is being developed now in Manchester. The MBAC,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you've also got a national English back, I think that I can't remember what they called it, which is being developed by another organisation.
Yeah, the NatBack, is it?
NatBack,
Yeah.
by Rethinking Assessment, I think, or somebody.
I think so. Yeah, I'm not entirely. So Tom Sherrington's been involved in it for a long time. I think that, I'm not sure if Rethinking Assessment are
Yes, Stephen, I think Stephen Wilshaw as well, because he interviewed me for a podcast with Mary Myatt's thing.
Yeah.
And I did pose the question. I said, look, you're all reinventing the wheel here. Why are you all doing it? We've already got incredibly fragmented educational landscape in this country, with everybody doing their own thing. Private schools are doing their thing, independent schools, state schools are struggling with the national curriculum, and now you've got the MBAC in Manchester being developed, which is probably very good, because they're looking at skills or vocational course. But I said, look, what you need is a national curriculum for everybody that's based on the same model, I would have thought, and one that works for all children. Otherwise, what do you do if you're in the South and you actually want to follow something like the MBAC, but that's situated in Manchester? It doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, does that mean you have the MBAC up in the North and then you have the national back, or whatever they're calling it, in the South? Kind of is not joined up. So
yeah, it's a very good point. It's a very good point.
The model has to be one for everybody, in my view, and one that works, really, doesn't it, for all children and young people?
Yeah.
From primary to secondary, yeah.
Okay, so we've got 10 minutes, and that's a hard deadline. And so I have three questions remaining. One is positives. We've talked a lot about the problems in this conversation so far, but there's also loads of amazing stuff that happens in schools up and down the land and all around the world every day. So let's focus on the positives. What do you like the look of as you look out into classrooms, into schools more widely, into FE colleges, maybe? I don't know where your gaze wants to land, but what do you like the look of? What would you like to boost the signal of or see more of?
I think what I'd like to see more of is a permission for schools to be more autonomous in their thinking. So you've got some brilliant educators out there, brilliant professionals. Schools I'm working with at the moment through the Chartered College as part of their Rethinking Curriculum project. They've got a real vision. They know what they want to do with the children. They've got interdisciplinary approaches at the back of their mind. They've got the right values. They should be given permission to do that. They shouldn't be fettered by a model that comes in sadly from inspection that says you have to do it this way. They need to be given that, they need to be given that autonomy and that respect as a profession to do what they know best, because it's their children, it's their school, and they know what works for those children. So I think they need to be allowed to flourish. The teachers and the senior leaders in school need to be allowed to flourish and do what's best for their children. I think that's number one. And I also think if in terms of another positive, you have got fantastic stuff going on in FE colleges as well, and young people in FE colleges are coming out of it trained up, skilled up, and feeling that hope again in themselves. Also, not forgetting the UTCs, University Technical Courses. I've worked with those as well, and that they have some fantastic curriculum in place, because again, they're working with children who've kind of been rejects, and so they're bringing them on board. And that is amazing when you see a child turn around and believe in themselves again and realize they can give a lot, and they can do this. It's not about I'm no good at maths. I can actually do this. It's fantastic, because my aim is to be an engineer, and so actually now I'm doing something concrete with the maths and putting it into a practical context. I can do it because it's hit that. So those are my positives in terms of the educational landscape at the moment.
Okay, I like it. Let's fly the flag for FE. It's good. You don't hear that happen too often. So thank you for that. No, you don't. Sadly. Okay, next is challenge. What's the major challenge or challenges that you see currently? This could be, again, you could pitch this at a number of different levels, the level of teachers, kids, parents. Like again, in FE, it could be international, it could be global issues that we face. what do you think is the number one thing that we need to get our heads around in education?
I think in this country, I'm going to limit it to this country. I think it's the mindset of being a very insular country, really, and thinking that what we're doing here is the only way that we can do this, and not learning from other countries. I think we should be learning from other countries. We should be learning about accountability frameworks from other countries where they're doing it better.
Right. Yeah.
Then we should be learning about education models, curriculum models as well. So one of the things that strikes me is in this country, our education is not driven by values. Nationally, it's not driven by values. The government, doesn't say these are the values we want our citizens to have. We want our citizens to develop into these young people who can sort of be productive. They can do this, they can do that. We want to be able to give them those opportunities. Those values are not apparent, they're not overt. Schools will develop their own values, but again, whether those permeate the curriculum is something that is sometimes happens, doesn't happen. So from my point of view, I think what we need to do is change the mindset around the whole education system. The fact that what we're doing isn't necessarily working for a lot of children, as we said right at the start, and we need to develop a system that actually borrows from countries where it does work well, and create that model for ourselves then as a result. So the mindset, and then create a curriculum or an education system that's imbued with the right values for our society.
Right. And thank you. And that basically includes the answer to the next question, which is how are we going to get there? And so you're saying that we need to have a more open mind, essentially, and look to international examples of good practice. So are there countries that you can think of where that problem that we talked about at the start, the sort of the enforced failure, essentially, the 1 in 3, the forgotten third, are there countries that you know of where that problem has been neutralized or mitigated?
Yeah, in Singapore and Estonia, both have got now curriculum that actually enable children to follow the pathways they want. And Singapore's one is very much driven by the values for the country, and is actually very sort of open about the fact that children will, what they want to see in young people, and then how they can achieve that. So rather than, they moved in 2019 from being very exam driven and very, we've got to get children passing exams, realizing this wasn't working in terms of the pressure on children, and then moved towards a system where children can achieve at their own rate, and progress at their own way. But Estonia, what I like about Estonia is that children can move, young people can move into vocational pathways, and if they feel they're not suited, they can move back, and that goes right up to university. So it's very, very much, and they are one of the high achieving countries alongside Singapore, actually, Estonia. I mean, this is what I think UK needs to think around, that if we're looking at learning outcomes for children, we're not the most high achieving country with outcomes for young people. So something needs to change. And we need to be looking at other countries where, as I say, they have made those changes. They have adopted, even India, I know they've moved towards a knowledge and skills-based curriculum. That happened in 2019 because they were influenced by other countries, and they looked, and they actually researched it. They came to the UK, I know the minister there, and they came to the UK, they looked at what was happening here. They then went to countries like Singapore, and thought, well, no, this is not working. So we're going to go with that model. And the model that was developed is one that now is used in schools, and if you think about the size of India, then, if they can do it, I think the UK could do it.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? You often hear people talking about like being evidence-based policy, but they're only evidence-based as long as it aligns with their ideological position, right? Exactly. So when it comes to things like grammar schools and academies, they're quite happy to ignore all the inconvenient evidence that points in the opposite direction, and they back the policies that are politically prudent that's a whole other conversation which we don't have time for. Meena, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do. I've very much enjoyed interacting with you over the years, and your involvement in the conferences and whatnot. Long may that continue.
Thank you, James. It's been delightful this afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you about the work. And let's hope our optimism, on an optimistic note, that change will happen.
Change is going to come. What was that?
Times are a changing, is it?
Times they are a changing. Some song or other will. Yeah. We've got a new song for the podcast, so I'm going to end by saying "Roll Rocktopus," and Rocktopus is gonna kick in, so you can listen to that. Were you there at the conference this year when they there was this band called Rocktopus and they wrote a song there and then? Yeah, they recorded it, so that's our new theme tune.
Yeah, they were coming around asking people things. I remember. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, yes. Lovely. All right. Thanks, Meena.
Thank you very much, James.
We have a narrow curriculum which squeezes out the arts. So let's rethink education. There is a lack of imagination and not enough fun. So let's rethink education. Children should be self-directed, showing us their way. Let them lead. Transferable skills should be the core of what we teach. Learn for life. So let's try. Right and not what is required. Let's have fun, let's explore. Let's bring back the love, forget the fear of being fired. We're forced to rank the children as Ofsted ranks the schools. So let's rethink education. We have a lack of agency. We're trapped inside the system. So let's rethink education. A place of transformation that embraces community. School is the heart. A place to dream, a place to play, a place to think and love, feeling free. So let's trust, let's be brave, let's do what's right and not what is required.